Tony Blair once said that the legislation that they were proposing would still leave Britain with, I think his words were, the most restrictive trade union laws in the Western world, as if somehow that was a good thing. And of course, this is something we should be absolutely ashamed of, as you very eloquently pointed out. Now, I've been asked to speak, where's the clock, for between 15 and 30 minutes, which is going to be a challenge for me, because I always waffle on for too long. But just to talk a little bit about the last 12 months and some of the challenges going forward, and I think some ideas or thoughts about campaigning, I think was the brief I was given to try and sort of talk about. So I'll try and do my best to do that. The first thing I just want to say, though, just in terms of the whole issue about the RMT, I sincerely hope that the RMT do vote. I understand it's quite close, but it is really going to be a key vote, that, and if we can get the RMT back on side, that will be a huge boost, I think, for all of us, and particularly for Jeremy, to have a progressive union who definitely shares the politics of Jeremy and John and Diane and, you know, the people in the Labour leadership now, and will make it that bit easier, I think, for us to, you know, push through the agenda that all of us, I think, in this room, and indeed the vast majority of the people in the country, want to see. But unfortunately, there are still a few power bases within the party who are seeking to try and, you know, slow that down or even reverse it. I don't know why. I mean, they seem to be sort of bought into the whole neoliberal agenda for God knows why, because it's been an absolute disaster for the vast majority of ordinary people, as we know. And then, you know, you kind of made the point just in terms of the precarious work force that we now have, and that is just kind of endemic across the country. And, you know, in the 6th biggest economy in the world, we shouldn't have a situation where people are treated in the workforce like that. We need to get back, it seems to me. We need to rediscover the spirit of 1945 and set in train a new consensus, because that post-war settlement resulted in every single year, if you look at the graphs right the way up through to the late 1970s, a bigger and bigger proportion of the national income went to workers in their wage packets. And that has been going in the opposite direction ever since. And so even in the 13 years that Labour were in office, inequality continued to get worse. We did put some money into public services, that's very, very true, and satisfaction of the National Health Service had never been higher when we left office. We lifted 500,000 kids out of poverty, but we didn't make those structural changes to the economy that were so desperately required, it seems to me, in order to ensure that, you know, when the pendulum does regrettably swing around and, you know, go back to the Tories, that they can't then reap the kind of damage which they've certainly done. I mean, these look like Thatcher on steroids, for God's sake. But when she came into power, the Tories under the Margaret Thatcher's leadership, it was so much more difficult for them to make the cuts and the changes that they wanted to do, because there was a lot of legislative protection in place, and local government at that time was a wonderful bulwark against Thatcherism and worked incredibly effectively, actually, for many, many years in slowing down the changes that the Tories wanted to bring about. And, you know, they've been very swiftly able to, you know, bring about absolute havoc across the entire country and impoverished, you know, many, many millions of people as a consequence. And of course, the other reason why I want the RMT back, just on a personal level, as you say, it was the railway union that gave birth to the Labour Party, and the very first Labour MP elected in England was in Derby, where I represent now. It was the General Secretary of the Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants, I think, was the union that he was a member of. Richard Bell, his name was. So, you know, we're standing on, or I'm standing on the shoulder of giants in that sense, in that, you know, the very first Labour MP to be elected in England was in the constituency that I represent right now. And of course, Derby also has a long Labour movement tradition going back, and you talked about, you know, syndicalists, and, you know, the Silver Lockout, if you're familiar with that, of course, was an attempt at, you know, one of the very first, I think, real struggles around, you know, the whole kind of syndicalism project in that sense. And regrettably, they lost that struggle. But it is a very important milestone, it seems to me, on the, you know, the Labour movement history. But looking back then over the last 12 months, and, you know, it's less than 12 months since we won the general election, isn't it? And you remember going into that election, 20-odd points behind, and everybody's saying we're going to get wiped out. Doom and gloom predictions, and, you know, even attempts at the last minute to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn. When I was selected as a candidate, people were saying to me, even people who were, if you like, on the progressive left, saying, Chris, you need to disassociate yourself from Jeremy Corbyn, because the important thing is that we win, and then you can, you know, show solidarity and support with Jeremy once you are elected as the Member of Parliament for Derby North again. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. One, it's a completely wrong, disloyal, dishonourable thing to do. But secondly, I think this kind of common sense socialist agenda that Jeremy is setting out is incredibly popular. And so far from actually disassociating myself from Jeremy, I put out a press release saying that I'm the most Corbyn-friendly candidate in this election anywhere in the country. And there was quite a few media pundits saying, who were commenting on this, saying, in a very sneery sort of way, well, he better win then, hadn't he? You know, on the basis that they thought, well, he ain't going to win, you know. And so I had loads of media people. I don't know if you may have seen some of them interviews, going to be from The Guardian, different Independent, all coming up to interview this kind of weirdo who was nailing his colours so firmly to the Jeremy Corbyn mast in the most marginal seat in England. It was just lost by 41 votes in 2015. But that agenda clearly did actually speak to millions of people. We had the biggest increase in vote share since 1945. I mean, that's a huge achievement when you think we couldn't have had a worse run-in to an election if you tried to organise a worse run-in to an election. And I got into trouble with some of the people who are signed up members of Continuity New Labour, and one or two others as well, when I suggested in a Morning Star article, and then I made reference to it in a campaign meeting for Jeremy. It was the very first campaign meeting for Jeremy's second leadership campaign. It wasn't originally, it had originally been billed as a Labour Assembly Against Austerity, but then the coup happened and then there's new leadership, so we changed it into his first campaign rally. And I referred to an article that I'd written in the Morning Star and said that I'd thought that the people that were involved in this coup were behaving as if they were Linton Crosby's sleepers, who'd been put into the Labour Party 10, 20 or 30 years ago to be activated at this very moment when the Tories are in complete disarray. Remember, this was just after the referendum. They were in absolute disarray, running around like headless chickens. Some of them were talking we need an early election, even though it would have been very detrimental to them, but that's what they were saying. And you've got a socialist leader of the Labour Party. That's the time to activate the sleepers, to create as much havoc in the Labour Party as you possibly can, and to let the Tories off the hook. If Linton Crosby or whoever else in the Tory party had deployed them as sleepers, it couldn't have done a better bloody job, because they did let the Tories off the hook with that coup. That was the time, surely, to seize the initiative, to press home our advantage, but they blew it, really. I mean, and you kind of think, why? I mean, I can only think that they were misguided. Let's hope that was misguided and not malevolent. If it was malevolent, it's absolutely unacceptable, clearly. But in those running to the election, therefore, we had that coup beforehand, lots of problems. We had a very difficult local election, if you remember as well, and the results weren't great. And I think that's what caused Theresa May to call the election. And then, as I say, we had the biggest increase in vote share since 1945. But I think that's because there was such an appetite for a different approach to the neoliberal, effectively, this is what it was, a neoliberal consensus which has held sway for the best part of 40 years now. Brought in by Margaret Thatcher in 1979 and adopted by Tony Blair. And yes, as I've said, we did some decent things as a new Labour administration for those 13 years, no doubt about that. But because we didn't make those fundamental structural changes to the economy, to the way we operate public services, to the way globalisation is allowed to wreak havoc. And the reason why our trade union membership has gone down in this country compared to its height in the late 1970s is not to do with people falling out of love with the trade unions movement so much as the jobs just disappearing. They've been offshored to low-wage economies. It's an absolute scandal. And not only that, they're using agencies like Tata in Derby, which is still a big manufacturing city, nowhere near as big as it used to be, it's got to be said. When I left school in 1972, there was around 120,000 skilled manufacturing jobs in Derby. There's around about 20,000 now in the city. Rolls-Royce employs around 12,000 people in Derby. In 1972, it employed 35,000 people. But they are using Tata to bring in highly qualified design engineers from India on a one-year visa, paying them a third of the salary that the design engineers who work on the books for Rolls-Royce get, working them 10 to 15 hours a week longer, and then shipping them back to India and getting a new cohort. This is the kind of thing that has been going on. And this is the sort of thing I think that people are getting really sick to death of. And we're looking for something different. And one of the things I know that Ed used to talk about that used to grieve him so much was when people used to say to him, well, you're all the same. Well, the problem was, Ed, you didn't do enough to make us sufficiently distinctive. That was the problem. That's why I lost my seat in 2015. People were saying, you're like, there's no difference between you and the Tories, Chris. We like you, and we think you're going to win anyway, and the Greens, it's safe to vote for the Green Party in Derby North because you'll win anyway. And a lot of people actually, after we lost, May came and apologised and said, oh, you were right and we were wrong, Chris. But all the polls, including Ashcroft and so on, were suggesting we were going to win. You wonder whether, some jiggery-pokery going on there, suggesting we were going to win in Derby North, for example, by 10,000 votes, and then we lost by 41. But people were fed up and they wanted something different. They wanted an alternative. So we lost. I mean, there's over 1 million people voted Green across the country. Nearly 4 million people, this is 2015, voted for UKIP, and 15.6 million people didn't vote for anybody. And people, I think, voted, and Jeremy made this point in his first leadership election campaign, that people voted UKIP out of desperation. I think there was absolute examples of that in Derby North, because their vote collapsed in 2017, and many of them actually came back and voted for Labour because we were offering them something. We were offering them an agenda which actually spoke to their concerns. And there's more we need to clearly do on that. And we actually in Derby North targeted explicitly the UKIP vote and said, look, if you want to take back control of the country, it's only Labour that's offering that choice. Because it's only Labour that's saying we are going to clamp down on the global corporations that are ripping people off, ripping consumers off. We're going to clamp down on these global corporations that are offshoring jobs through the right to own, which we'll talk about in a bit if we get time. We are the only party that's offering to repeal the anti-trade union legislation, which is enabling these global corporations to exploit workers. So if you want to take back control, Labour's got to be your choice. And I've got to say, it did speak to a lot of people, and I am absolutely convinced that we did win back a lot of UKIP voters. Most of the people that voted UKIP weren't bigots or racists. As I say, I think they voted, some were, obviously, And in fact, I spoke to one guy on the doorstep who said, I always vote for the BNP, and when they aren't standing, I vote UKIP. And I said to him, and I went through that argument about, globalisation and, taking control, the global corporations and so on, stopping them, not sort of fiddling their taxes or whatever else, offshoring and so on and so forth. But also made the point, as we did in the campaign, that as ordinary working people, we've got more in common with the migrant community than you've got with the people at the top of the society. Just raise your eyes above the horizon, for God's sake. Solidarity is what will carry us through. And Dennis Skinner always makes a great anecdote when he speaks at places, and he talks about after the Second World War, where there's a lot of Polish workers working down the pit. And he said there were no issue then about Eastern Europeans coming and working down the pit with us, because they were all in the union and they all got the rate for the job. That is the key thing, and this is where the trade union movement is so important, it seems to me, in actually making sure that people aren't exploited and that we can stop that divide and rule tactic that the Tories like to utilise. So over the last 12 months, we had that worst run in, then we had this fantastic election result. Clearly we didn't win, but we did well, and we could have won, I think, with if we hadn't had some of the negative voices within the Labour Party who were undermining the party, it seems to me. So on issues like public ownership, where the public are massively on our side, on housing, on higher education, on reversing privatisation, not just in terms of the big utilities and the railway, etc., but kicking the privateers out of all of our public services. They've got no place delivering public services. They are obliged under law, really, actually, because they have a fiduciary duty to maximise the return for the company. And how do these privateers make their margins? They make their margins by exploiting the workers, cutting back on terms and conditions, and often diminishing the quality of service to the general public. And you kind of look at my own local authority, where our home help service, as it used to be called, in the 80s and 90s, was kind of our pride and joy. Hardly any, if any, are now actually delivered directly by the local authority. But it's delivered by the private sector. And the terms and conditions are nowhere near as good. Clamp down on on holiday pay and sick pay and all those other things, and pensions and all the rest of it. So you know, I think there is a massive appetite, and there has been a massive appetite, and we demonstrated that, and there's more, however, that we need to do going forward, it seems to me, to you know, win more people over to the you know, Labour agenda in that sense. So over the last 12 months, then I think, you know, clearly we had this fantastic election result, which, you know, could be better, but it was still a pretty good one given the run into it. The democracy review over the last 12 months is going to be an absolutely key agenda for the Labour Party. I know it's a bit of internal navel gazing, but it will have huge implications going forward in terms of the democracy review and how the party will be organised. Because what we'll be talking about is how do we engage with our members better, but some of the key issues in relation to future leadership. How do we select our leader? What role will the MPs have in that? Will they be the gatekeepers? Who should be the gatekeepers? My view is the MPs should not be the gatekeepers in any way, shape or form. If we're going to have a gatekeeper to becoming a candidate for the leader, well, it ought to be the constituency Labour Party, or maybe a combination of constituency Labour parties and trade unions. And if you can't secure a particular threshold of constituency Labour parties and trade unions, we've got no business being the leader of the political Labour movement. It's not the political wing of the Labour movement, clearly, in my opinion. Yeah, have a round of applause for that. That's what you're right. So that, I think, is going to be key. And another key element within it is going to be how do we select our candidates for election. I'm a big advocate of mandatory reselection. There is no other elected office. We're having a conversation just before. No other elected position anywhere in this country has a job for life. As I was making a joke, actually, you know, whether it be trade union leaders, councillors, or even the secretary of Jeremy's Allotment Association can be thrown out at a whim after just 12 months because she's subject to an annual general meeting. It's called democracy and accountability. Why are these MPs so frightened of it? And some of them say, well, we are accountable to the electorate. That's who we're accountable to. We're not just a delegate for the Labour Party. And I'll say, fine, pal. Absolutely no problem with that. Go on, stand as an independent then, mate, and see how far you get. They only get elected because of the Labour logo, the Labour brand, and the hard work of Labour Party activists. And they need to respect that. It's all about, it seems to me, accountability and democracy. I was on the politics, the daily politics of the week with Chris Leslie, a colleague of mine in one of the East Midlands seats, and he's referring to it like it's a job. Oh, we get this tap on the shoulder, they want to make me redundant. No! If you want a normal job, go and get a job somewhere else. Go and work for the new Labour, what was it called? The new local government network or something. Being an MP ain't a job. You're there as a representative. It's a privilege to be here representing people. In my case, representing my home city. And to represent the values of the Labour Party. For God's sake, why are you standing as a Labour MP? If you don't want to represent the views of the values of the Labour Party, if you don't want to listen to the ordinary rank and file grassroots party members, it's an absolute travesty. Utter travesty. And so we should call them out on that. And so I'm hoping that the Democracy Review will recommend mandatory reselection. I think they will if they don't recommend that. And I would urge you, if you've not already done so, to make a submission to the Democracy Review calling for that. But if they don't recommend that, I think there will certainly be some proposal to beef up the trigger ballot mechanism, which is not fit for purpose. Of course, we've had, over the last 12 months, Brexit has been the major issue. And when I was in Parliament last time, it was pretty full on, you know what I mean? There was quite a big legislative programme, you know, lots of three-line whips, you constantly, you know, in there voting and whatever else. And it's like a zombie parliament, mate. And there's just hardly anything going on half the time. It really is absurd. And a lot of the emphasis is around, you know, Brexit. And of course, the Tories are all over the place on that. And it's regrettable that some people who, I know, perhaps feel strongly, and maybe some people in this room feel strongly that we should remain in Europe. I mean, look, it wasn't a panacea. I mean, I campaigned for Remain, and you know, I was virtually every night. I organised public meetings, street stalls, and all the rest of it. But in the end, the people voted the way they voted. But the European Union was not, you know, an institution without any flaws, because it clearly wasn't it? It was too much of a capitalist club. There was too much of a presumption in favour of privatisation. I think there were some benefits from it, and of course, I mean, we've heard, you know, about the vagaries of the, you know, the measures that the work time directive only is good if you've got a good trade union movement behind that, or a decent employer that's prepared to enforce it in that sense. But, you know, they're there. And so it was kind of, I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It was a kind of Yanis Varoufakis line, you know, let's kind of remain in reform, but the sort of line that Jeremy put forward. So I think that's kind of really where we've been over the last 12 months. I think in terms of going forward, organisation will be absolutely key, and the trade union movement has got to have a massive role, it seems to me, in that. There is a huge job for us to do in terms of winning over people to the Labour cause. I don't subscribe, as you can probably tell, to the notion that our route back to power is by persuading Tories to vote Labour. I've nothing against Tories voting Labour, by the way. If they have a Damascene conversion, then obviously all for that. But I think what they mean by that is that we need to moderate and trim our agenda in order to appeal to people who previously voted Tory. Now, again, it's straws in the wind, it's anecdotal stuff, but I mean, I go out virtually every week knocking on the door of my own constituency, and indeed in other constituencies for that matter. And I have to say, I've come across a handful of people, it's not huge numbers, but I've come across a handful of people who, and we know from the canvass returns that they were previously Tories, previously against us, who are saying that they're going to vote Labour now because we are a principled party, we've got a leader who's an honest man and he's trustworthy. And on that basis, people who have been long-standing Tories have voted. Now, there are lots, of course, who say, I'm never vote for that bloody communist and all that kind of nonsense. Interestingly, those who say, I'm never going to vote Labour again, when you look at the canvass returns, and again, I'm not saying all of them, obviously, because I think we have lost some support, but many of them, you look at the canvass returns, you think, we've never voted Labour. You know, so it's just the latest convenient cover for saying, well, I'm not going to vote for the Labour Party now. That's not to be complacent about that, because clearly there was an issue and they did a job on Jeremy, but because he's an honest guy, and because we got, I think, a credible programme, I mean, they did a job on Ed as well, but our programme wasn't credible. So, you know, when they're focusing on the way Ed ate a bacon sandwich or whatever, that had more traction, I think, than Jeremy's walking around in a shell suit. Because I think Jeremy, you know, is a more credible candidate, he's a more honest guy, and he was putting forward a genuine radical alternative. So, you know, there was more substance then. I think that was the problem. But we still have a job to do, I think, in terms of mobilising people, though, as I say, because if you look at the non-voters again, I mean, the Tories won the election with 13.6 million this time around. We got just 700,000 less than them, 12.9 million. But the biggest cohort was the non-voters again. 14.8 million people did not vote. And we've got to appeal to people, it seems to me, and give people a reason to vote. And that's where all of us in this room and outside actually come into the equation. Because it can't all be delivered by Jeremy and John and Diane and, you know, the good MPs that are, and there aren't enough of them, in the House of Commons at the moment. It can't be left to them. Yes, they've got an obviously a vitally important role to do in mobilising the troops and, you know, inspiring people, etc. But it's got to be down to us. It's got to be down to grassroots activists in the trade union movement, in the Labour Party, getting involved in local community organisations and taking the message out to people and doing politics alongside people, getting to the place where we're doing politics with people, not to people. It's not the Labour Party over here coming in and doing politics over there. It's we're kind of doing it together. And it's kind of, you know, getting involved in those community organisations as the Labour Party or as a prominent Labour Party activist, so that people know that you are, you know, from the Labour Party. The Labour Party itself has acknowledged the importance of this and has now appointed a community organiser coordinator, and in each region we're going to have community organisers whose job will be to obviously organise the community, and that's going to be really key and important. And I'm hoping that now we've got Jenny Formby in the role as the General Secretary, that we can start to make some changes to the way in which the regional officers operate. Because I think they've been, in my experience, far too focused on internal bureaucracy and almost kind of stopping things happening, rather than actually being an enabling institution in that sense and being more outward focused. And so I hope that when these regional organisers are in place, the regional officers will kind of help and facilitate and get behind them. We need obviously more than one per region. We need, well, ideally one in every constituency at least over time, but clearly we'll have to build up to that. Obviously the doorstep work is important still, going and doing the door knocking. I know people go out door knocking, but you know, it's important that we go out and have those conversations, meaningful conversations. I remember in the 2015 election, we were getting all these reports back. It was what's his name, Douglas Alexander, saying, you know, we've had so many million conversations with people on the doorstep. I don't think we're having conversations. We're going, are you voting Labour? Yeah, great. Off you go. Are you voting Labour? No. All right, fair enough then. And I think we need more meaningful conversations with people. And I know in an election time, you know, you don't want to be necessarily spending too much time on the doorstep. However, we've now got a mass movement. We've got hundreds of thousands of members. And at this election, I've never known the number of people come out and help. So because we've got more resources at our disposal, we've got greater opportunity, I think, to have more meaningful conversations with people and have those longer discussions with people. And you can turn people around, you really can. I know some of the old stalwarts who you know, they sort of do canvassing in that way I just identified, and it was in Derby I'm on about whinge and moan at me for spending too much time on the doorstep, but I just think it's worth it. You know, I always say I'm building a Rolls Royce, not just sort of, you know, not just churning out something on a production line, you know. So it takes time to do that, and it does bear fruit. And you plant seeds in people's minds, and that's what's important. That you know, give people some food for thought. And then I think that throws the other thing, just in terms of organising, is have a bit of fun. Because it can be fun, can't it, I think? And if you've got more than a few people, when you're trudging around just one or two, it can be a bit soul-destroying. But if you've got a load of people out with you, it can be a good laugh. It really can. And some of you probably, I can see some people nodding who kind of, you know, acknowledge that. It really can. And I know some people get daunted by going and knocking on the door. It's not that daunting, in reality. Most people are quite welcoming and very, very polite. And if you get some dickheads, I mean, well, so what? You can have a laugh. If there's a load of you out there, don't worry about it. I mean, you know, I'm sorry, it's sad to say there are some idiots in the world. But I also think organising things like this, you know, social events. I know some constituencies are organising socialist film clubs. And when I joined the party in 1976, I mean, they were beginning to wane a wee bit, but they were like, you know, Labour Party walking clubs. You had a Red Rope, I think it was called, the Labour Party climbing club. So doing those social things and bringing people together outside necessarily the formal politics, I think is really, really important. Because it helps to bond activists together as friends. And then when you're asking people then to come out and do stuff on the doorstep or put these leaflets out, they're more likely to do it because you're mates. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? You probably know all this anyway, saying, what's he bloody spending all that time doing that for? I was asked then to say just some of the dangers then going forward. Well, obviously, Brexit, I suppose, continues to be a potential hazard for us, and we have, I think, plotted a fairly careful course. We've got these 6 tests that we said are going to be key to the way in which we eventually vote on the issue. But you know, Labour voters are split. I mean, down in the south, in London, there's a strong Remain, but in a lot of northern constituencies, there's a huge opposition vote, wasn't there? A Brexit vote, and I think sort of respecting the vote is all we can really do. Right, to be honest with you, I mean, as a Democrat, if you like, you've got to just respect the outcome of the referendum. And what I always say is that by campaigning actually against Brexit and by calling for another referendum, you're making it more likely we'll end up with a worse kind of Brexit. Turn Britain into a deregulated tax haven. And what we should be arguing for is for a Brexit that works in the interest of ordinary people, that respects terms and conditions of workers, that actually does facilitate decent jobs. And I mean, this commitment in the manifesto, the right to own, where we talked about giving workers where they are threatened with being asset stripped in their company, the opportunity to buy out the company. I mean, that's a huge commitment, you know. One, I think, which will potentially transform this country. Because you would be changing the balance of power in the workplace, because you'd be creating a network of worker cooperatives. We'll be actually giving form to the vision that Tony Benn, he said, Tony Blair, wash my mouth out with soap and water. Tony Benn said, Tony Benn, get it right, Tony Benn set out all those years ago about industrial democracy. So worker cooperatives will be a key part of that, but other elements as well in terms of giving workers a greater say in the workplace. And again, if I can quote Tony Benn or paraphrase what he was saying, he's saying that people who invest their lives in a particular company have as got much right to a say in that company as those that have just got loads of brass and are able to throw money at it. I think that's reasonable, don't you? So I think a lot of people out there would be actually switched on by that. Because it's common, I keep calling it common sense socialism. It is just common sense. The public are with us. They can see that it don't make sense for these global corporations to be ripping us off, and the housing crisis is a scandal, and penalising people for having the temerity to get a higher education. People want something better, something different, and if we can offer that, I think that will help to appeal to the 14.8 million that didn't vote last time. But we've got to go out and actually make the case, and we've got to find a way of articulating that case to people that they hear it. Because I think sometimes we've got a good message that actually you'd think, well, it ought to resonate with some groups in society, people who are marginalised, who are poor, and it's just not cutting through. So again, this is where the mass movement comes in, about how are we going to have those conversations, and how are we going to get involved in those community groups so that people are hearing that message. And then I think there's another area which I keep banging on about that we need to be making the argument for, around our very strong environmental credentials. Because I think there's a big cohort out there as well who, if we were to actually promote our environmental agenda, and particularly the one that Jeremy mapped out in the manifesto, but what Jeremy mapped out in his leadership campaign, that would really resonate with a lot of people, and indeed persuade people to come out and support us. And he's making the case, for green economics, if you like. And we've got Alan Simpson, who's a great guy, former MP for Nottingham South, who's absolutely kind of the brain as big as a planet on this issue, really very, very knowledgeable. And he's working directly with John McDonnell on sustainable economics. That's going to be really key, I think. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Just simple things like, if we could insulate everybody's home in the country properly, we would actually, at a stroke, eradicate fuel poverty in this country, reduce everybody's fuel bills, and create jobs in every single town and city in the country. It just makes common sense, doesn't it? Again, back to common sense socialism. But anyway, yeah. So certainly Brexit is a danger for us. The smears are a danger that we are constantly subjected to. We have to rise above that and not get sucked into it. And I know some people have actually engaged with the smear merchants, and have then found by doing that, they've then maybe said something slightly inappropriate, and then find themselves being suspended or even expelled from the Labour Party. And we've got to just be mindful of that. I know we're getting control of the bureaucracy now, but people are looking to take out any activists who are sympathetic to this agenda. Not just about being sympathetic to Jeremy, because it's not just about Jeremy, it's about this whole socialist programme that we're putting forward. And there are very dark forces at play, believe you me. There's not a week goes by without there's a call for me to be expelled or to have the whip withdrawal. But being an MP, it's a bit more tricky for them to follow through. Other people, even now I've seen people have, because we've not fully got control of the bureaucracy of the party, have been suspended, for, I think, rather dubious allegations. And so it's vitally important, I think, that we're on the money with that, and we're just careful about how we use social media, because social media is a massive tool for us. It's something that we can work really effectively, I think, in terms of getting the case out there, but we just need to be careful how we do that. And I suppose another danger is that, the potential demoralisation of activists when they see these constant smears and the attacks, etc. And this is where, again, we need solidarity. It's kind of that old Labour movement maxim, unity is strength, solidarity is going to be key. Because if we can show solidarity with each other, that will actually keep us strong. Just in terms of an example, really, of the misrepresentation that we get subjected to, the narrative in the media was that we had a disastrous night at the local elections. And of course, we could do better. You always want to do better. But in London, we had the best result for 50 years. That's pretty good going. We were piling up seats in places like Worthing and other unusual suspects in that sense, places that had never normally voted Labour in the past. We were piling up seats there, winning votes in places where we'd never won at all. In Wandsworth, where we said, this great target, which we've not held for over 40 years, terrible result in Wandsworth. And yet, we actually won the popular vote in Wandsworth. We had about 1,500 more votes than the Tories, and we needed, I think there's a difference between about 141 votes spread across 4 wards between the difference between us having control of Wandsworth and actually losing it. Even in Barnet, where a lot of the accusations about anti-Semitism they were saying would play badly against the Labour Party, and I'm sure it probably did work against us. But our vote went up again. We had a 3% increase in the popular vote across Barnet. So obviously don't believe the lies and the smears and all the rest of it that are going to be put about, because there will be a lot of that. And if anybody's seen a very British coup, you'll know I mean, that's almost like a blueprint, isn't it, for the sort of tactics that the establishment will use to try and undermine a socialist Labour Party. But make no mistake, it is socialism that we are moving towards. It really is. It may not be, perfect socialism. If you like, it's common sense socialism in that sense. We are going to take these big utilities back into public ownership. We are going to bring the railways back into public ownership. We are going to bring the Royal Mail back into public ownership. But we're going to have a better model of public ownership as well. Because there was a criticism of that 1945 government, was there not? This top-down statist approach. And I mean, people in the miners, probably heard the tell, saying, well, what's the bloody difference? The only thing at the pit end is they've changed the sign at the front of the pit, and the gaffers are still the same. I mean, clearly there was a difference, and bigger improvements in health and safety and all the rest of it. But what we want to do is to involve people about real, genuine democracy, a bottom-up approach. So giving people that opportunity to have a greater influence over the energy companies and all the rest of it. It's through the establishment of cooperatives, through a municipalisation programme as well. So, we are, and this was entitled Forward to Socialism, wasn't it? We are going forward to socialism, comrades, we are. And the future belongs to us. Because if you look at the cohorts of who voted Labour, who voted for a Corbyn-led Labour Party at this last election, over 60% of under 30-year-olds voted Labour. Now, yes, we don't win so many votes from those in the older generation, people of my generation and older. But I think that's partly because they get their news and information from the mainstream media. And the younger generation is able to get it from a range of different sources, including the alternative media, including social media. So social media, whilst it can be a damn nuisance and can be a problem and can be used against us, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And that's how we did, I think, as well as we did in the last election. Some of the momentum videos were getting to as many as 12, 13, 14 million people. It's incredible. So it's a really powerful tool. But the future does belong to us. Just remember that. Young people are with us because we're offering them a future. We're saying you're not going to be penalised for going to university. We're going to make sure there are decent council houses available for you. We're going to make sure that you can get a secure job. And all this bullshit about we need a flexible labour force and you have to be willing to be changing your career 2 or 3 times during your lifetime. Why? I remember in the 1960s being told to get ready for the leisure generation because by the time of the 1990s you'll only be working 10 or 15 hours a week because of automation. Now we're in this 4th industrial revolution now with robotics and all the rest of it. Let's use it for the benefit of the people, not for the top 1%. That's all we're saying. And again, it's plain common sense, isn't it? And we're determined to do it. So we've never had a programme which is as easy to go and sell on the doorstep. You've got over 80% of the public support bringing back the water into public ownership, for example. 77%, I think, the latest one I looked at, it may have moved around a wee bit, to bringing the rail into public ownership. We're only talking about setting up one national investment bank, for God's sake. So there is an appetite. There is an appetite there. And what we need to do, what our job, what your job is therefore to do, it seems to me, is to move those people, those non-voters, because a lot of those in that 80-odd% who want water brought back into public ownership are non-voters, aren't they? So we've got to get that message out there to those people. So it's never, I don't think, been an easier time for us to go and sell the Labour Party's message on the doorstep. Because it is common sense. The people support it, so it's up to us to go and sell it. So it ain't just about, in conclusion, comrades, just winning the next election. Important though that is. This is about changing history. And you are all history makers, comrades. So let's go out and change history and forward to socialism.